The Canadian Rockies had not seen a storm this fierce in 20 years. Snow fell relentlessly as temperatures plummeted to -40 degrees Fahrenheit, and winds howled at 80 miles per hour through the wilderness. Wildlife across the region huddled in whatever shelter they could find, fighting for survival against nature's brutal assault. Deep in the heart of this frozen wilderness lived Luna, a magnificent bobcat with golden fur marked by distinctive black spots. She was a seasoned mother, fierce and protective, who had successfully raised 3 litters in her 7 years of life. But nothing had prepared her for the crisis she now faced with her youngest kitten, Scout. Scout was only 6 weeks old, still small enough to fit in Luna's mouth when she carried him. His eyes had recently opened to reveal bright amber pupils that sparkled with curiosity about the world around him. He had been playing near their den that morning when disaster struck without warning. A massive pine tree, weakened by the storm's relentless assault, groaned and cracked under the weight of accumulated ice. As Scout tumbled playfully in the snow below, a heavy branch broke free and crashed down with devastating force. The impact caught Scout's tiny hind leg, crushing bone and tearing flesh in a wound that would have challenged even an adult bobcat's survival. Luna heard her kitten's agonized cry pierce through the howling wind. She rushed to him immediately, her heart breaking at the sight of his mangled leg. Bone protruded through matted fur, and blood stained the pristine snow beneath him crimson. Scout's breathing came in shallow, rapid gasps as shock began setting in. Luna knew with maternal instinct that her baby was dying. Her first attempts at finding shelter proved futile. Every cave she knew had been claimed by other desperate animals or blocked by fallen debris from the storm. The old hollow log where she had planned to wait out the blizzard was now completely buried under 6 feet of snow. Even the small overhang of rocks that had served as emergency shelter in previous storms offered no protection against this unprecedented fury. With each passing hour, Scout grew weaker. His tiny body shivered uncontrollably despite being pressed against Luna's warm fur. His cries became fainter, barely audible above the wind. Luna's maternal desperation reached a breaking point as she realized that all her wilderness survival skills were useless against this catastrophe. Then something extraordinary happened. Luna remembered the distant lights she had observed during her hunting expeditions over the past few years. Far across the valley, where the forest gave way to a small cleared area, there stood a structure that glowed with warmth even on the darkest nights. She had always avoided that place, knowing instinctively that it belonged to humans, the species her kind had feared and avoided for generations. But fear meant nothing when weighed against a mother's love. Luna made a decision that went against every survival instinct encoded in her DNA. She would seek help from the humans even if it meant risking her own life. Gently lifting Scout in her mouth, careful not to worsen his injuries, she began the most dangerous journey of her life. The trek through 2 miles of deep snow tested every ounce of Luna's strength and determination. Her paws, designed for stealth rather than endurance, began bleeding as sharp ice cut through her pads. The weight of her kitten, though small, became increasingly difficult to manage as exhaustion set in. Several times she stumbled and fell, but each time she struggled back to her feet, driven by pure maternal will. Scout's breathing grew more labored with each step. Luna could feel his tiny body growing cold despite her efforts to keep him warm. Time was running out, and she knew that this desperate gamble represented his only chance for survival. Finally, through the swirling snow, Luna saw her destination. A small, weathered cabin sat nestled among the trees, its single window glowing with warm light like a beacon of hope in the wilderness. Smoke curled from the chimney, promising the warmth that Scout so desperately needed. Luna could hear movement inside, confirming that humans were present. Standing at the edge of the clearing, Luna faced the moment of truth. Every instinct screamed at her to flee, but love proved stronger than fear. Taking a deep breath, she approached the cabin door and prepared to take the biggest risk of her life. Martha Williams sat hunched over her small wood stove, her 78-year-old hands wrapped around a chipped ceramic mug containing what little remained of her evening tea. The arthritis in her joints ached more fiercely during storms like this, each gust of wind seeming to send sharp pains through her swollen knuckles and stiff shoulders. 5 years had passed since her beloved husband Robert died of a heart attack, leaving her alone in this remote cabin 50 miles from the nearest town. What had once been their cozy retirement retreat had become her prison of poverty. Robert's pension had died with him, and her own meager social security barely covered the basics. For the past 3 weeks, she had survived on nothing but canned soup and stale bread, rationing each meal to make her dwindling supplies last until the next town trip. The cabin creaked and groaned under the storm's assault, but Martha had grown accustomed to these sounds over her years of solitude. She pulled Robert's old wool blanket tighter around her shoulders and stared into the dancing flames, wondering how much longer she could endure this isolated existence. Then she heard something different. A scratching sound at her front door, distinct from the random scraping of wind-blown branches against the cabin walls. At first, she dismissed it as debris carried by the storm, but the sound continued with an almost rhythmic pattern that made her pause. Scratch, scratch, scratch. The sound grew more insistent, almost pleading in its persistence. Martha's heart began to race as she realized that something was deliberately trying to get her attention. Living alone in the wilderness, she had learned to be cautious about unexpected visitors, especially during dangerous weather when desperate people might resort to desperate measures. Moving slowly to avoid aggravating her arthritis, Martha approached the heavy wooden door. The scratching continued, now accompanied by what sounded like soft whining. Her hand trembled as she reached for the door handle, uncertain whether she should investigate or simply wait for whatever it was to go away. Taking a deep breath, Martha unlocked the door and pulled it open. The sight that greeted her defied every expectation she might have had. There, sitting in the swirling snow just beyond her doorstep, was a magnificent bobcat with golden fur dusted with ice crystals. But what truly shocked Martha was what the wild animal carried in her mouth. A tiny kitten, barely larger than Martha's fist, hung limply from the mother's gentle grip. Even in the dim light spilling from the cabin, Martha could see the terrible wound on the baby's leg and the dark stain of blood in the snow beneath them. Both animals looked near death from cold and exhaustion. Martha's initial fear gave way to amazement as she realized what was happening. The mother bobcat made no move to flee or attack. Instead, she carefully lowered her head and placed the injured kitten directly at Martha's feet, then stepped back slightly and looked up with eyes that seemed to plead for understanding. The kitten was barely breathing, his tiny chest rising and falling in shallow, irregular gasps. His wounded leg was clearly broken, possibly beyond repair. Martha had seen enough injured animals during her years with Robert to recognize that this little one was dying. What happened next would stay with Martha for the rest of her life. The mother bobcat, this wild predator who should have feared humans above all else, looked directly into Martha's eyes with an expression of pure, desperate hope. In that moment, Martha understood that she was witnessing something extraordinary. This wild mother was begging for help, entrusting her most precious possession to a complete stranger. Martha's compassionate heart, already moved by the tragic sight, overrode any remaining fear or hesitation. She bent down carefully and gently scooped up the tiny, cold kitten, cradling him against her chest. The mother bobcat watched every movement but showed no aggression, only anxious concern. "Come inside," Martha whispered, stepping back from the doorway. "You'll both freeze to death out there." To her amazement, the mother bobcat didn't hesitate. She padded through the doorway and into the warm cabin, her golden eyes never leaving her injured baby. Once inside, both animals collapsed near the wood stove, utterly exhausted from their ordeal. Martha closed the door against the storm and looked down at the unlikely guests who had just changed her life forever. Martha knelt beside the wood stove, her arthritic joints protesting with each movement, but her focus remained entirely on the dying kitten in her arms. Years of watching Robert tend to injured animals during their hunting trips had taught her basic first aid, knowledge she never imagined she would need for a wild bobcat. The mother cat, whom Martha decided to call Luna because of her silvery markings, watched with intense golden eyes as Martha examined Scout's wounds. Every time Martha's hands moved too close to the kitten, Luna would emit a low, warning growl, her maternal instinct still on high alert despite accepting Martha's help. Martha moved slowly and spoke in soothing tones as she retrieved Robert's old first aid kit from the kitchen cabinet. Her hands shook slightly as she opened the small bottle of antiseptic, knowing it was one of her most precious remaining supplies. Without hesitation, she poured the liquid over Scout's mangled leg, causing the tiny kitten to cry out weakly. Luna's growl intensified, but she didn't attack. Instead, she moved closer, as if understanding that this pain was necessary for healing. Martha used 2 wooden spoons from her kitchen drawer and strips torn from one of her last clean bedsheets to create a makeshift splint for the broken leg. Her movements were gentle but confident, guided by memories of watching Robert perform similar procedures. The most challenging part came next. Scout needed nourishment, but Martha's food supplies were nearly exhausted. She made a difficult decision, opening her last can of chicken broth and mixing it with some powdered milk she had been saving for emergencies. Using a small spoon, she carefully fed the mixture to Scout drop by drop. Over the next 3 days, something remarkable began to happen. Luna gradually started to trust Martha more completely. The fierce protective mother allowed Martha to pet her golden fur while Scout rested, and even began purring softly when Martha spoke to her in comforting tones. Martha found herself sharing more than just her food with her unexpected guests. During the long hours of nursing Scout back to health, she began talking to Luna about her loneliness, her fears about surviving another winter alone, and her cherished memories of Robert. Luna seemed to listen intently, her amber eyes focused on Martha's face as if she truly understood every word. Scout's recovery proved more rapid than Martha had dared hope. By the fourth day, the tiny kitten was attempting to play, batting weakly at Luna's tail and trying to stand on his splinted leg. His appetite returned with a vengeance, and Martha watched with joy as he began to gain strength. The bond that formed between Martha and her wild guests filled a void in her heart that had been empty since Robert's death. When Scout began crawling onto her lap for warmth, purring contentedly as she stroked his soft fur, Martha realized she hadn't felt this needed or genuinely happy in years. But this happiness came with a growing concern that Martha tried to hide from her new companions. Her food supplies were now completely depleted. She had been giving most of her remaining provisions to Luna and Scout, keeping only minimal portions for herself. Her arthritis pain had worsened from the stress and cold, though she did her best to conceal her discomfort. Each morning, Martha looked anxiously toward the window, hoping the storm would break so she could somehow make the dangerous trip to town for supplies. But the blizzard continued relentlessly, trapping them all in the cabin together. She began to wonder how much longer she could care for Luna and Scout without proper food or medical supplies. The irony wasn't lost on her. She had saved these wild animals, but now they might all face starvation together. Martha's practical mind told her she should be worried, but her heart felt fuller than it had in years. Even if this was how her story ended, she was grateful not to be alone. Luna seemed to sense Martha's growing weakness. The mother Bobcat began spending more time pressed against Martha's side, sharing her natural warmth. Scout continued to improve daily, his playful energy a bright spot in their increasingly desperate situation. As Martha drifted off to sleep on the seventh night, Luna's steady purring serving as a comforting lullaby, she wondered what tomorrow would bring for their unlikely family. On the eighth morning, Martha woke to find something had changed. Scout was strong enough to walk around the cabin, his splinted leg barely slowing him down, but Luna was nowhere to be seen. The front door remained securely closed, yet somehow the mother Bobcat had vanished. Martha searched every corner of the small cabin, calling Luna's name softly, but found no trace of her. Panic began to set in as she realized that Luna might have abandoned them, perhaps deciding that her kitten was safe enough to leave behind. The thought of losing her newfound companion filled Martha with a sadness she hadn't expected. Hours passed with no sign of Luna. Scout seemed restless too, constantly looking toward the door and making small mewing sounds as if calling for his mother. Martha tried to comfort him, but she could feel her own anxiety growing with each passing minute. Just as the sun was setting, Martha heard a familiar scratching at the door. Her heart leaped with relief as she opened it to find Luna sitting in the snow, but something was different. The Bobcat had something in her mouth, something she dropped carefully at Martha's feet before looking up expectantly. Martha stared in disbelief at the large, fat rabbit lying in the snow. Luna sat proudly beside her gift, her tail twitching with what appeared to be satisfaction. The realization hit Martha like a thunderbolt. Luna had been hunting for her, bringing her food just as she had shared her own meager supplies with the Bobcat family. Tears filled Martha's eyes as she understood the magnitude of what was happening. This wild animal was trying to repay her kindness, providing for her in the only way she knew how. Martha had never prepared wild game by herself, but memories of watching Robert clean and cook rabbits during their early years together guided her through the process. That night, for the first time in weeks, Martha ate a proper meal. The rabbit provided more protein than she had consumed in months, and she could already feel her energy beginning to return. Luna watched approvingly as Martha shared portions of the cooked meat with both cats. Over the following week, Luna established a routine that amazed Martha daily. Each morning, the Bobcat would disappear for several hours, returning each evening with fresh game. Fish from an unfrozen stream, squirrels, birds. Luna seemed to know exactly what Martha needed to regain her strength. Martha's health improved dramatically with proper nutrition. Her arthritis pain decreased, her energy returned, and the constant worry about survival began to fade. Scout grew stronger and more playful each day, his broken leg healing remarkably well under Martha's continued care. But the most shocking discovery was yet to come. On a crisp afternoon 2 weeks later, Luna didn't return from her hunting trip at her usual time. Martha and Scout waited anxiously by the window, watching the forest edge for any sign of movement. As the sun began to set, Martha's heart nearly stopped at what she saw emerging from the treeline. Luna appeared first, but she wasn't alone. 3 adult bobcats followed behind her, each carrying prey in their mouths. They moved in a careful line toward the cabin, their golden coats gleaming in the fading light. Martha watched in stunned silence as Luna led this procession directly to her door. Each of the 3 bobcats dropped their offerings, 2 rabbits and a large fish, then sat back respectfully while Luna approached the door with her own contribution. The realization struck Martha with overwhelming force. Luna hadn't just been telling other bobcats about the kind human who had saved her kitten, she had convinced them to help. These wild predators, who should have feared and avoided humans at all costs, were actively participating in keeping Martha fed and healthy. Through her research of local wildlife over the years with Robert, Martha knew this behavior was completely unprecedented. Bobcats were typically solitary creatures, rarely cooperating even with their own kind. Yet here was clear evidence of a coordinated effort to care for a human being. As Martha opened the door to collect the gifts, she looked into Luna's intelligent eyes and understood a profound truth. This wasn't just about repaying a debt, this was about family, chosen family that transcended species boundaries. The transformation of Martha's life over the following months bordered on miraculous. What had begun as a desperate rescue mission had evolved into something that defied all understanding of wildlife behavior. The Bobcat family had essentially adopted Martha, creating a hunting rotation that ensured she never went hungry again. Luna's 3 adult companions, whom Martha learned were her grown offspring from previous years, each took turns providing for the strange multi-species household. The eldest, a magnificent male Martha named Thor for his impressive size, specialized in catching fish from the nearby stream. The 2 females, whom she called Grace and Hope, were expert hunters of small game and birds. Martha's health transformation was remarkable. The constant protein from fresh game eliminated her nutritional deficiencies, and her arthritis pain decreased significantly. Her energy levels returned to heights she hadn't experienced in years, and the constant stress of wondering where her next meal would come from had completely disappeared. Scout had grown into a healthy, playful young bobcat who behaved more like a house cat than a wild predator. He slept on Martha's bed each night, followed her around the cabin during the day, and had even learned to respond to his name. Yet he maintained his wild instincts when playing with Luna and the other bobcats outside. The routine continued peacefully until an unexpected visitor arrived during another winter storm. Dr. Sarah Chin, a wildlife biologist from the University of Calgary, had been conducting research on winter wildlife patterns when she became lost in a sudden blizzard. Following a faint light through the trees, she stumbled upon Martha's cabin just as Luna had months earlier. Dr. Chen's amazement at finding an elderly woman living peacefully with a family of wild bobcats was immediately apparent. As a scientist who had spent her career studying animal behavior, she recognized that she was witnessing something unprecedented in wildlife biology. "This is impossible," Dr. Chen whispered as she watched Scout curl up in Martha's lap while Luna groomed herself contentedly by the fire. "Bobcats don't form cooperative relationships with humans. They're solitary, territorial animals." Martha shared her story with Dr. Chin, who documented everything with growing excitement. The scientist learned that Martha had been surviving entirely on food provided by the Bobcat family for over 2 months, and that the animals had essentially created a social structure that included her as a protected member. Dr. Chen's documentation of this unique relationship quickly attracted attention from wildlife researchers worldwide. Martha's story spread through scientific journals and eventually reached mainstream media, earning her the nickname, the Bobcat Lady. The attention brought an unexpected development that would test the strength of the bonds Martha had formed with her wild family. A geological survey commissioned by the university revealed that Martha's inherited property sat atop significant mineral deposits. A mining company approached her with an offer that made her gasp in disbelief: $2.3 million for the rights to her land. The offer represented more wealth than Martha had ever imagined possessing. She could move to a comfortable home in town, receive the best medical care for her arthritis, eat in restaurants every day, and live in luxury for the rest of her life. All she had to do was leave her Bobcat family behind. Martha stared at the official documents for hours, the pen trembling in her arthritic hand. Dr. Chin watched quietly from across the table, understanding the magnitude of the decision before this remarkable woman. "They saved my life," Martha finally said, setting the pen down without signing. "I won't abandon them now." Instead, Martha negotiated a different arrangement. She would sell a portion of the land rights for enough money to establish an official wildlife sanctuary, ensuring her Bobcat family would always be protected. The remaining funds would go toward wildlife conservation programs across North America. The mining company, impressed by her dedication and the positive publicity her story had generated, agreed to the modified arrangement. Martha had found a way to secure both her future and the future of the wild family that had chosen to love her. 5 years had passed since that desperate night when Luna first scratched at Martha's door, and the changes in all their lives had been profound. Martha, now 83 years old, possessed a vitality that amazed everyone who met her. The combination of proper nutrition, purpose, and the unconditional love of her Bobcat family had given her a quality of life she had never expected to experience again. Scout, now a full-grown Bobcat, still slept curled up beside Martha's bed every night. Despite his wild heritage, he had never lost the bond formed during those first crucial days of healing. Luna, now a grandmother to a new litter of kittens, continued to bring her babies to meet Martha, as if introducing them to an honorary member of their extended family. The cabin had been transformed into a small but respected research station for human-wildlife relationships. Dr. Chin visited regularly, documenting the ongoing interactions and publishing papers that had revolutionized understanding of interspecies cooperation. Martha's book, When Wild Hearts Meet Kind Souls, had become a bestseller, with all proceeds funding wildlife rehabilitation centers across North America. Martha's story had inspired the creation of similar sanctuaries worldwide, proving that her experience, while unique, had opened possibilities for new approaches to wildlife conservation. She received visitors from around the globe, all wanting to witness the extraordinary relationship between the elderly woman and her Bobcat family. But time, as it always does, eventually brought changes that no amount of love could prevent. During a particularly harsh winter morning, Martha woke feeling unusually weak and dizzy. She tried to hide her condition from her wild companions, but Luna's keen senses immediately detected that something was wrong. The great mother Bobcat refused to leave Martha's side that day, positioning herself like a guardian beside the elderly woman's chair. As Martha's condition worsened, something remarkable happened. One by one, the entire Bobcat family gathered around her, as if summoned by some invisible signal. Scout pressed close against Martha's legs, purring with the same intensity he had as a kitten. Thor, Grace, and Hope arranged themselves in a protective circle around her chair. Even Luna's newest litter of kittens seemed to understand the gravity of the moment, settling quietly nearby. Martha looked around at the wild faces surrounding her with love and felt a peace she had never known was possible. These magnificent creatures, who owed her nothing, had chosen to be her family when she needed them most. In return, she had given them something equally precious, proof that love could transcend every boundary that nature had supposedly created. As the sun set on Martha's last day, she whispered her gratitude to each of her wild companions. Luna pressed her great head against Martha's hand one final time, and Martha passed peacefully, surrounded by the family that had saved her life in every way that mattered. The caretaker who took over the research station was amazed to discover that Luna continued visiting Martha's grave site, often bringing small wildflowers in her mouth. Even more remarkably, she observed Luna teaching Scout's own cubs about the kind human who had once lived among them. The tradition of caring for humans in need had apparently passed to the next generation of Bobcats. Local rangers reported several instances of the cats bringing food to lost hikers or injured travelers, behavior that had never been documented before Martha's time. Martha's grave marker, placed in the small clearing where she had lived her happiest years, bore a simple inscription that captured the essence of her extraordinary life. She proved love knows no species. The story of Martha Williams and Luna became more than just a tale of rescue and gratitude. It became proof that sometimes the wildest hearts understand kindness better than humans, and that one act of compassion can create miracles that last for generations.